They gave him an ultimatum: the family fortune or the woman he loved. He chose her, and he was disowned, humiliated, and cast out with nothing but the clothes on his back. But that's not where the story ends. Years later, he returned, not as a broken son, but as a secret billionaire with a single goal: a cold, calculated revenge plot to destroy them all. This isn't just a love story, it's an epic tale of retribution. Have you ever felt betrayed by the very people who should have loved you the most? Have you ever wondered what you would do if your own blood turned their backs on you for money? This is the journey of Calvin Fields, a man who lost everything, and Julie Larson, the poor girl who became his only treasure. Get ready for a story of intense family drama, proving how true love can be forged in the fire of humiliation, and how revenge can have a life-changing cost that no billionaire can afford to pay. In this video, we're going to dive into a world of luxury, betrayal, and a revenge plan so methodical it will leave you breathless. With every move he makes to dismantle his family's empire, one question gets louder: is he seeking redemption, or is he becoming the very monster he always despised? The line between justice and hatred is dangerously thin, and a shocking plot twist could change everything in an instant. If you believe that true love is worth more than any fortune, comment "Love Wins" down below to show your support. Leave a like as a sign of respect for Calvin and Julie's emotional journey. And if you have a friend who loves a story of redemption and revenge, share this video with them. Subscribe and hit that bell, because you won't want to miss a single second of this saga of love, betrayal, and destiny. Calvin Fields stepped back into the city like a ghost, a phantom of a forgotten scandal. To the world, he was a myth, a name whispered in the highest echelons of finance, but here, he was just a memory. This was his reluctant coming home, not for a reunion, but for a reckoning. He moved through the familiar streets, now a stranger in his own past, his heart a cold engine fueled by a decade-old promise. The air itself seemed thick with the unresolved family drama he was about to reignite, a truly emotional return. The fire within him had been stoked by the sharp, vivid memory of his father's final words, the casual cruelty of being disowned. It was a wound that never healed, a constant reminder of the day he was humiliated for choosing love over legacy. He had chosen Julie Larson, a woman they dismissed as a poor girl, and in their eyes, it was an unforgivable sin. That single act of betrayal from his family had become the blueprint for his entire life, the catalyst for this intricate revenge plot. Now he was no longer the boy they threw away. He was a force of nature, a secret billionaire, who had built an empire from the ashes of his former life. Every deal he closed, every risk he took, was a step towards this very moment. He had mastered the ruthless game his father taught him, not to join him, but to utterly dismantle him. This life-changing transformation was his armor, meticulously crafted for the war that was to come, a testament to his unbreakable will and a harbinger of their doom. His family, blissfully unaware, continued their lives of opulent ignorance. They were insulated by generations of wealth, blind to the storm gathering just beyond their gilded gates. They didn't know that the anonymous corporate raider bleeding their company dry was the same boy they had cast out. Their arrogance, the very thing that drove him away, was now the weapon he would use against them in a most shocking turn of events. Their insulated world was about to be shattered by a ghost from their past. And through it all, there was Julie Larson. She was the reason and the risk, the calm center of his storm. Their love story was the one pure thing in his life, a sanctuary he fiercely protected from the darkness of his ambitions. He told himself this path of revenge was to build a secure future for them, but he knew she would never approve of the coldness growing in his heart. He was walking the tightrope between his true love and the all-consuming need for vengeance. The first move had already been Matty a quiet, almost imperceptible tremor in the stock market. An anonymous entity, his entity, had begun acquiring key assets, starting a chain reaction that would lead to their ruin. It was the beginning of a masterful and devastating chess game, where he was the only one who could see all the pieces. He was setting the stage for a plot twist that would not only cost them their fortune, but their pride as well. A final poetic justice. As he stood in his penthouse, overlooking the city that had once rejected him, Calvin glanced at an old photograph of him and Julie. They were young, smiling, with no idea of the tempest that awaited them. He had to remember why this all started, to recall the simple, profound kindness he found with her. A kindness that was worth more than any dynasty. That memory was the key to understanding the chasm between the man he was and the man he had become. A classic tale of a rich man, poor woman, and the forces that tore them apart. The world Calvin Fields grew up in was one of polished marble and hollow echoes. His home was a mansion, but it felt more like a museum, a cold, silent place where affection was a commodity and approval was always conditional. Dinners were formal, conversations were transactions, and every achievement was measured against the family's towering expectations. It was a gilded cage, a lonely kingdom where he was the prince of a loveless dynasty, a prime example of a toxic family drama that valued legacy above all else. Then, he met Julie Larson, and his world was flooded with color. Her apartment was small, a little cluttered, and filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sound of genuine laughter. It was a place where kindness wasn't a strategy, but a way of life. She wasn't impressed by the Fields' name or the fortune attached to it. She was captivated by his quiet humor and the sadness she saw in his eyes. Theirs was a love story born not of convenience but of a deep, emotional connection. He remembered one particular evening after a brutal critique from his father about a minor business decision. He felt small, insignificant, completely humiliated. He drove to Julie's, the weight of his world pressing down on him. She didn't offer advice or platitudes, she simply made him a cup of tea and listened. In her presence, he wasn't Calvin Fields, the heir. He was just Calvin, a man who could finally breathe. She was the antithesis of his world, a beacon of simple, true love. The contrast was staggering, almost a shocking revelation to him. His family saw people as assets or liabilities, pawns in a grand game of power. Julie saw people. She volunteered at a local community center, helping kids who had nothing, and she did it with a joy that was utterly foreign to him. This was a different kind of wealth, one that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. Their relationship was a classic rich man, poor woman narrative, but with a depth that defied the cliché. He found himself spending every possible moment with her, soaking in the warmth and authenticity he had been starved of his entire life. With Julie, he learned about loyalty that wasn't bought and respect that was earned through character, not a surname. Their bond became his anchor in a sea of corporate ruthlessness and familial coldness. This wasn't just a fleeting romance, it felt like destiny, a life-changing discovery of what it truly meant to be happy and loved for who he was. His father, however, saw Julie as a threat. He couldn't comprehend a relationship that wasn't transactional. To him, this poor girl was a distraction, a flaw in the grand design for his son's future. He saw her simple kindness not as a virtue, but as a weakness that could compromise the family empire. This fundamental misunderstanding set the stage for the ultimate betrayal, a conflict that would force Calvin to choose between two completely different worlds. Calvin knew, even then, that he was at a crossroads. He could either continue on the path laid out for him, a lonely, gilded road leading to a throne he didn't want, or he could choose the uncertain, unpaved path with Julie, a path that promised nothing but a chance at genuine happiness. The choice seemed simple to him, but he was naive to the cruelty his father was capable of. He underestimated the lengths his family would go to protect their legacy, even if it meant destroying their own son. The confrontation was as brutal and orchestrated as a public execution. Calvin's father summoned him to a family dinner, a rare occasion that always felt more like a board meeting. But this time, there was a guest of honor he hadn't invited: Julie Larson. She stood there, beautiful and unassuming, completely out of place amidst the cold opulence. It was a trap, and Calvin felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The air was thick with impending doom, the climax of a long-simmering family drama. His father didn't waste time with pleasantries. He began a cold, systematic dissection of Julie's life, her background, her lack of pedigree, her job. He spoke of her as if she were an unfortunate investment, a liability to the Fields brand. Every word was a dagger, designed to make her feel small and worthless, to leave her utterly humiliated in front of the man she loved. Calvin watched, his fists clenched, as Julie stood her ground with a quiet dignity that his father's money could never buy. Then came the ultimatum, delivered with the chilling detachment of a CEO firing an employee. "You will end this foolishness with this." "Poor girl," his father declared, his voice cutting through the silence. "Or you will walk out of this house tonight with nothing. You will be disowned. You will cease to be my son. The choice is yours, her, or this family and everything that comes with it." It was the ultimate act of betrayal, a father forcing his son to choose between love and identity. There was no hesitation. Calvin didn't even look at the fortune he was leaving behind. He looked at Julie, whose eyes were filled with tears, but whose spirit was unbroken. He saw his future, his happiness, his true love standing right there. He walked over to her, took her hand, and turned to face his father. "Then I guess I'm no longer your son," he said, his voice steady despite the rage and pain coursing through him. It was a shocking act of defiance that sealed their destiny. They were thrown out with a theatrical cruelty. The guards escorted them to the gates, their meager belongings to be sent later. The heavy iron gates closing behind them felt like a tomb sealing shut, the end of a chapter and the beginning of a brutal, uncertain exile. They had nothing but each other, a classic rich man poor woman tale stripped of its glamour and left with the raw, painful reality. The feeling of being cast out was a deeply emotional and life-changing moment for them both. As they walked down the long driveway, the weight of what just happened began to sink in. Calvin had given up $1 billion inheritance for this woman. To the world, he was a fool. To his family, he was a disgrace. But as Julie squeezed his hand, a sense of rightness settled over him. This wasn't a loss, it was an escape. He had chosen his soulmate over a fortune, and in that moment, he felt richer than he ever had in his father's house. This was the true beginning of their love story. But as they disappeared into the night, the seeds of another story were planted. The humiliation and injustice of that night didn't just break Calvin's heart, they forged it into something harder, colder. He knew that one day, he would be back. Not to beg for forgiveness, but to enact a precise and devastating revenge. The boy who was cast out would return as a king, and he would burn their kingdom to the ground. The revenge plot had officially been born. What one word describes his father's cruelty? Let me know in the comments. Years passed, each one a building block in the empire of Calvin's rage. He operated from the shadows, a ghost in the machine of global finance. He was now the secret billionaire he had vowed to become, his power vast and his identity a closely guarded secret. The time for hiding was over, the time for his methodical revenge had arrived. His target was Fields International, the company that was his birthright, the symbol of the family that had disowned him. His first move was silent but deadly. Through a labyrinth of shell corporations, he initiated a hostile takeover of one of their key suppliers, choking their production line almost overnight. His family, arrogant and complacent, didn't see it coming. They scrambled for answers, blaming market volatility, completely unaware that the architect of their chaos was their own blood. The ensuing panic in their boardroom was the first taste of the victory he craved, a truly shocking blow to their foundation. Next, he attacked their stock price. Using a team of expert traders, he orchestrated a short-selling campaign, spreading carefully crafted rumors and exploiting every minor weakness in their quarterly reports. The stock plummeted, wiping out hundreds of millions in value in a single week. His father, the man who prided himself on his business acumen, was left baffled and furious, watching his life's work crumble. This was more than business, it was a deeply emotional and psychological war. The beauty of his revenge plot was its anonymity. No one could trace the coordinated attacks back to a single source. To the outside world, Fields International was simply the victim of a series of unfortunate events, a giant stumbling under its own weight. Calvin watched from his penthouse, a modern-day puppet master pulling the strings of their downfall. The sense of power was intoxicating, a balm on the old wound of being humiliated and cast aside like garbage. Julie, however, remained his anchor to reality. She knew he had become successful, but she was shielded from the ruthless extent of his operations. He lived a double life, the loving partner at home and the corporate predator in the office. He justified his actions as a way to secure their future, to right a terrible wrong from their past. But a part of him knew that this path was changing him, hardening his heart in a way that felt dangerously familiar, a life-changing transformation he hadn't anticipated. His family was bleeding money, and paranoia began to fester within their ranks. They started turning on each other, the perfect illustration of their dysfunctional family drama. Accusations flew, old rivalries resurfaced, and the facade of unity shattered under the pressure. Calvin had not only targeted their finances, he had targeted the fragile bonds that held their corrupt dynasty together. He was dismantling them from the inside out, piece by painful piece. This was only the beginning. He had a dozen more moves planned, each one more devastating than the last. He wouldn't stop until his father was on his knees, until the entire family understood the magnitude of their betrayal. He was crafting a masterpiece of vengeance, a symphony of destruction that would echo for generations. The ultimate plot twist was yet to come, and they were all unwitting actors in his tragic play, a play about a boy who had to become a monster to slay one. Julie Larson had always known the man behind the myth. She fell in love with a gentle soul trapped in a gilded cage, not the ruthless tycoon the world was beginning to whisper about. While she was proud of Calvin's success, a quiet unease had started to settle in her heart. She saw flashes of a man she didn't recognize, a coldness in his eyes, a hard set to his jaw when he thought she wasn't looking. It was a subtle, life-changing shift that worried her deeply. She knew the scars from his family ran deep. The pain of being disowned and humiliated was a ghost that haunted him. But she had always believed their love story was the antidote, the proof that he had won by simply walking away and building a life with her. Now she sensed something more, a simmering anger that seemed to be driving him. This wasn't just ambition, it felt like a relentless, all-consuming quest, and it was a deeply emotional burden for her to witness. One evening, as he stared intently at his laptop, a flicker of raw fury crossed his face. Gently, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Is everything okay, Cal?" she asked, her voice soft. He quickly masked his expression, but she had seen it. "It's just business," he'd say, a phrase that was becoming a wall between them. She didn't press, but the distance was growing, a silent testament to the secrets he was keeping. Their true love was being tested by a shadow she couldn't name. She tried to remind him of the man he was, the man she fell in love with. She would bring up old memories of their early days, living in a tiny apartment, their shared dreams of a simple life. "Remember when we said all we needed was each other?" she would ask, a gentle probe into his hardening heart. She was trying to pull him back from the edge of a cliff she couldn't see, to remind him that their love was his real victory, not some corporate conquest. The irony was painful. He was building an empire, ostensibly for her, but the process was eroding the very qualities she cherished in him. The kindness, the empathy, the gentle spirit were being replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. She feared he was becoming a reflection of the very people who had hurt him, particularly his father. It was a shocking thought, a potential plot twist in their fairy tale romance that she didn't want to entertain. She was completely unaware of the scale of his revenge plot. She had no idea that the stressful business he spoke of was a targeted campaign to systematically destroy his own family. If she knew, she would be horrified. Her entire ethos was built on kindness and forgiveness, the cornerstones of the redemption she believed he had already found just by loving her. The truth of his actions would be the ultimate betrayal of the values they had built their life on. And so, she continued her gentle campaign of love, fighting a war she didn't understand. She was trying to save Calvin Fields from a darkness of his own making, a darkness born from a deep-seated family drama. She hoped her love would be enough to quell the anger she saw growing inside him, unaware that she was a force of light battling a hurricane of revenge. She was trying to save his soul while he was busy trying to conquer the world that had cast him out. Calvin's older brother, Edward, was the epitome of the Fields' arrogance. He was the son who stayed, the one who played by their father's cruel rules, and he wore his inheritance like a crown. Seeing Fields' international hemorrhaging money, Edward devised a plan not to save the family business, but to carve out a piece for himself. He saw an opportunity in the chaos, a chance to prove he was the true heir. He was a product of the toxic family drama he was raised in, driven by greed and a sense of entitlement. His target was a newly emerged, aggressive investment firm that had been buying up industry assets at an astonishing ration of Calvin's anonymous shell companies. Edward, suspecting nothing, saw this mysterious firm as a cash-rich, naive new player. He concocted a scheme to sell them a failing subsidiary of Fields International at a grossly inflated price, using falsified documents to hide its toxic debt. It was a classic move of corporate betrayal, a swindle he was confident would go unnoticed. He had no idea he was walking into the lion's den. Calvin had anticipated this move for months. He knew his brother's greed and incompetence were a predictable combination. The entire shell company was an elaborate trap, designed specifically for this moment. As Edward made his pitch, Calvin's team played their roles perfectly, feigning eagerness and letting Edward believe he was in complete control. It was a masterfully set stage for a truly shocking humiliation. The deal was signed. Edward felt a surge of triumph, believing he had outsmarted both the mysterious firm and his own struggling family. He had secured his personal fortune, a move he was sure would finally earn his father's respect. But the moment the ink was dry, Calvin sprung his trap. His legal team immediately exposed the fraud, not just to the board, but to the federal regulators. The evidence was irrefutable, a perfect checkmate in his long-brewing revenge plot. The fallout was catastrophic and immediate. Edward was not only fired from the company in disgrace, but was also facing serious criminal charges. He lost everything: his position, his reputation, and the fortune he had tried to steal. He was left completely broken, a pawn who had been sacrificed in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Calvin had not just defeated his brother, he had utterly and completely annihilated him. A deeply emotional and calculated strike. This was a major victory in Calvin's war. He had removed a key player from the board and sent a ripple of terror through the rest of his family. They now knew they weren't just facing bad luck, they were being actively hunted by a predator they couldn't see. The fear was palpable, the paranoia deepening. The name Calvin Fields never even entered their minds. The boy they disowned was a distant, powerless memory, which made the plot twist of his involvement all the more potent. From his office, Calvin watched the news of his brother's downfall with a cold, detached satisfaction. There was no joy, only a grim sense of justice being served. This was for every taunt, every dismissal, every moment he was made to feel inferior. It was one more piece of his old life turned to ash, one more step towards the ultimate confrontation with his father. The path to redemption was still far, but the path of revenge was proving brutally effective. Desperate and cornered, The Fields family finally turned their attention to what they believed was Calvin's only weakness, Julie Larson. In their world, everything had a price, and they assumed the poor girl who had started this whole mess could be bought. Calvin's mother, a woman as cold and polished as the marble in her foyer, arranged a meeting with Julie under false pretenses. It was a last-ditch effort to control a narrative that had spiraled far beyond their command, a vile tactic born from their twisted family drama. They sat in a ridiculously opulent restaurant, a stark contrast to Julie's simple grace. Calvin's mother didn't bother with subtlety. She slid a cashier's check across the table, the amount written on it containing enough zeros to be truly life-changing. "This is for you," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "All you have to do is disappear from his life. A man of his new stature can't be held back by distractions from his past." It was a cruel, calculated move meant to leave Julie feeling humiliated. Julie looked at the check, then back at the woman who represented everything she and Calvin had escaped. There was no anger in her eyes, only a profound pity. She gently pushed the check back across the table. "My relationship with Calvin has never been a transaction," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The love we have can't be bought or sold. I'm sorry for you, because you'll never understand a fortune like that." It was a simple, powerful declaration of her true love. Unbeknownst to them, Calvin had been alerted to the meeting by his security team and was listening to the entire exchange from a nearby surveillance van. He had been ready to storm in, to unleash his fury on his mother for this disgusting act of betrayal. But as he heard Julie's words, he was frozen in place. Her quiet dignity, her unwavering integrity, was more powerful than any angry outburst he could have mustered. It was a moment of pure, shocking grace. Hearing her defend their love story with such conviction struck a chord deep within him. It was a sound he hadn't heard in a long time, the sound of pure, unadulterated goodness. It sliced through the layers of ice that had formed around his heart during his quest for revenge. For the first time, he saw a crack in his own resolve. He was fighting monsters, but he was doing it with monstrous tactics. Julie, on the other hand, fought with light, and she was winning. This moment was a critical plot twist in his emotional journey. He was so focused on his revenge plot that he had started to forget what he was fighting for. It wasn't just about punishing them, it was about protecting the world he had built with Julie, a world founded on the very principles she had just so beautifully articulated. Her rejection of the bribe wasn't just a defense of their love, it was a reminder of the man he was supposed to be. That night, when he held Julie, he held her a little tighter. The cold anger in him had been tempered by a profound sense of awe and love for this incredible woman. She was his moral compass, his true north. While his family saw her as a weakness they could exploit, Calvin now understood more clearly than ever that she was his greatest strength. Her integrity was a quiet act of defiance that spoke louder than any of his corporate attacks, hinting at a path of redemption he hadn't yet considered. Like this video as a sign of respect for Julie's integrity. The endgame was near. Fields International was on the brink of total collapse, gasping for air as its credit lines were cut and its assets were frozen. Calvin orchestrated the final push, a manufactured liquidity crisis that would force an emergency board meeting. He knew every member of that board, their weaknesses, their price. The stage was set for the ultimate act of his revenge plot. His father, arrogant to the very end, still believed he could salvage the empire he had built on a foundation of cruelty. Calvin attended the meeting not as himself, but as a disembodied voice on a secure conference call, representing the anonymous holding company that now owned the majority of their debt. To his father and the board, he was Mr. Black, a mysterious and powerful financier, their last and only hope. The irony was exquisite. The son he had disowned and cast into the darkness was now the very shadow from which they were begging for light. It was a shocking reversal of power. His father, a man who had never begged for anything in his life, was forced to plead. He laid out the company's dire situation, his voice, usually so commanding, now strained with desperation. He spoke of legacy, of family, of the institution he had dedicated his life to. He asked Mr. Black for a bailout, for a lifeline to save them from utter ruin. Every word of his plea was a symphony to Calvin, a deeply emotional and validating moment that he had dreamed of for a decade. From his penthouse office, miles away, Calvin listened, his face an unreadable mask. This was the moment he had craved with absolute, unequivocal humiliation of his father. He held the man's entire world in the palm of his hand. He could crush it or save it with a single word. The power was intoxicating, a potent drug that threatened to consume what was left of his soul. This was the pinnacle of the family drama, played out in a sterile corporate boardroom with billions of dollars on the line. He let the silence stretch, savoring his father's discomfort, making him sweat. He then began to speak, his voice digitally altered, cold and devoid of emotion. He questioned his father's competence, picked apart his failures, and reminded him of his arrogance. He wasn't just talking about the company, he was talking about their entire history, encoding years of pain into the language of business. He was making his father feel exactly as small and powerless as he had made Calvin feel on the day he was cast out. Ultimately, he agreed to the bailout, but with conditions so severe, they were essentially a surrender. He demanded his father step down as CEO and that the board be dissolved and replaced by his own people. His father, with no other choice, agreed to every term. He had saved his company but lost his throne, forced to hand over his crown to a faceless stranger. It was a hollow victory for the old man and a complex, bittersweet one for Calvin. A truly life-changing moment. Calvin hung up the call, the silence of his office deafening. He had won. He had brought his father to his knees. The revenge was almost complete. Yet, the taste of victory wasn't as sweet as he had imagined. There was a cold emptiness that came with it. He had achieved the power he craved, but he felt a disconnect from the true love and warmth that Julie represented. This act, meant to be his crowning achievement, felt more like a step further into the darkness, a move away from any hope of redemption. With his father stripped of power, Calvin prepared his final, most devastating move. It wasn't enough to take the company he wanted to salt the earth, to erase his father's legacy completely. The plan involved acquiring the land the original Fields factory was built on, a symbolic gesture, and redeveloping it. It was a cold, final act of his revenge plot, designed to be the nail in the coffin of his family's pride. He was so consumed by this final stroke that he overlooked the collateral damage. The redevelopment deal went through seamlessly. It was a massive transaction that involved rezoning an entire district. In his quest for total victory, Calvin relied on his team's due diligence, failing to inspect the fine print himself. Buried deep within the annexes of the deal was a list of smaller properties to be demolished, including a small, unassuming building that housed the local community center. The very same center where Julie poured her heart and soul into helping underprivileged children. The news broke on a Tuesday. Julie came home, her face pale, her eyes filled with a pain Calvin had never seen before. She held a crumpled eviction notice. "They're tearing it down," she whispered, her voice trembling. An anonymous corporation bought the whole block. The center, the playground, everything. Calvin's blood ran cold. In that instant he knew. He was the anonymous corporation. His vengeful arrow had missed its target and struck the one thing he loved most. It was a shocking, sickening plot twist. Julie, still unaware of his involvement, raged against the soulless, greedy company that would do such a thing. She spoke of the children who would have nowhere to go, the community that would be shattered. And as she spoke, Calvin's silence became his confession. The look on her face when she finally understood, when she connected the dots between his mysterious business and this tragedy, was one of pure, unadulterated betrayal. It was a look that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "It was you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "All this time, this coldness, this anger, it was all for this? To become one of them?" The accusation hung in the air, heavier than any corporate failure. In her eyes, he wasn't a powerful billionaire seeking justice. He was a monster who had destroyed a safe haven for children out of spite. His quest to destroy his father had inadvertently ruined a piece of her soul, a deeply emotional and unforgivable act. His victory turned to ash in his mouth. All the power, all the money, all the meticulously planned revenge meant nothing in the face of her shattered trust. He had been so focused on the past, on the family drama that had defined him, that he had destroyed his own future. He had proven his father right. He had allowed his obsession to corrupt him, and in doing so, he had humiliated the values Julie held most dear. This was the true cost of his war. She didn't scream or cry anymore. A quiet, resolute sadness settled over her. "The man I fell in love with would have helped those kids," she said, her voice hollow. "He wouldn't have been the one to drive the bulldozer." She packed a small bag, the silence in their home deafening. He had won his war against his family, but in a final tragic irony, the last casualty was his own true love. His victory was a hollow, lonely throne. Be honest, would you forgive him at this point? Tell us below. From the windows of their diminished but still luxurious world, what remained of the Fields family watched the fallout. They had spies, informants, people who kept them apprised of the goings-on in Calvin's life. When the news reached them that Julie Larson had walked out on him, a wave of cruel, triumphant celebration erupted among them. They didn't know the specifics of the community center, only that the poor girl who had started all this family drama was finally gone. To them, this was the ultimate victory. They had lost their company, their status, their power, but they had succeeded in breaking him emotionally. They believed his love for Julie was his Achilles heel, the one vulnerability in his otherwise impenetrable armor. Seeing her leave was proof that, deep down, he was still the boy they could hurt, the son they could manipulate. Their twisted logic saw this as a win, a vindication of their belief that love was a weakness. His father, now a figurehead in his own former company, allowed himself a rare, bitter smile. "He has all that money, but he's alone," he sneered to his wife. "In the end, we were right. She was a fleeting distraction. Now he has nothing but his hollow empire, just like I said he would." It was a perverse and shocking interpretation of events, a desperate attempt to reclaim a sense of control after being so thoroughly humiliated in the boardroom. They were celebrating their own prophecy of his misery. They imagined Calvin, the untouchable secret billionaire, rattling around in his massive penthouse, completely and utterly alone. This was the fate they had always wished for him after his initial betrayal. If he wouldn't be their son, then he would be no one's partner, no one's love. They saw this not as a consequence of his actions, but as the natural order of things reasserting itself. The Fields dynasty might be wounded, but they believed Calvin's spirit was now permanently broken. Their celebration was born of a profound misunderstanding of what true wealth was. They saw Julie's departure as Calvin losing his most prized possession, not as him losing a part of his own soul. They could not comprehend the depth of a love story like theirs, a true love built on something other than mutual benefit or strategic alliance. Their small vindictive victory was a testament to their own emotional poverty, a sad final chapter in their legacy of cruelty. This news emboldened them. They started to believe they could somehow turn the tables, that a broken Calvin was a vulnerable Calvin. They began to whisper of new plots, of ways to use his emotional distress against him to perhaps reclaim some of what they had lost. They were like vultures circling what they perceived to be a dying lion, completely misreading the situation. They saw a defeat, not a crucible that would spark a life-changing transformation. They had no idea that this moment of profound loss was not an end for Calvin, but a violent, painful beginning. They celebrated his isolation, believing it was the final act of his downfall. In reality, it was the catalyst for his potential redemption. They thought they had finally won the war for his soul, but they had only succeeded in showing him that his path of revenge had led him to become exactly what they wanted alone: powerful and miserable. Julie found a small room to rent on the other side of the city, a place where the shadow of Calvin's new empire couldn't reach. Every waking moment was a battle against a tidal wave of grief. It wasn't just the loss of their home or the community center, it was the loss of the man she thought she knew. The kind, gentle soul she had fallen in love with had vanished, replaced by a cold strategist who saw people as collateral damage. It was the most profound betrayal of her life. In her mind, their love story had become a tragedy. She replayed their last conversation over and over, his silence echoing louder than any excuse he could have offered. She saw him not as a victim of his past, but as a willing participant in a cycle of cruelty. He had set out to destroy the monster, but had become one in the process. She believed his heart, once so full of love for her, was now completely consumed by his hatred for his family. She mourned for the man he was and for the future they were supposed to have. Their true love, which had survived being disowned, poverty, and public humiliation, had been single-handedly destroyed by his own victory. It was a shocking and bitter irony. He had gained the whole world but had sacrificed his soul, and in turn, had sacrificed her. The emotional weight of this realization was crushing, leaving her feeling heartbroken and utterly alone. Calvin, in his sterile penthouse, felt an isolation so profound it was a physical ache. The city lights outside his window seemed to mock him, illuminating a world he had conquered but could no longer enjoy. He was surrounded by the trappings of his success: the art, the technology, the symbols of his immense power as a billionaire. But without Julie, the apartment was just a box. His victory was not just hollow, it was a tomb, and he was its only occupant. For the first time, he was truly alone. When his family cast him out, he had Julie. They were a team, a fortress of two against the world. Now he had no one. He had achieved the goal of his decade-long revenge plot, but there was no one to share it with, no one to tell him it was worth it. There was only a deafening silence, filled with the echo of Julie's last words. He had become the king of a lonely, desolate island of his own making. He wandered through their home, touching her thinkst book left on her nightstand, the half-finished mug of tea in the kitchen. Every object was a painful reminder of the life he had carelessly demolished. The family drama he had sought to end had claimed one final, unexpected victim: his own happiness. This wasn't a plot twist, it was the logical, brutal conclusion of a path paved with vengeance instead of forgiveness. The weight of his actions crashed down on him. He had been so blinded by the need to make his father pay that he didn't see the price he himself was paying. He had sacrificed the one person who loved him for who he was, not what he had. He had achieved his revenge, but he had lost his reason for living. In the silence of his hollow victory, a new, agonizing clarity began to emerge, a realization that this was not the end he wanted. This was rock bottom. Calvin stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, the same office from which he had orchestrated the downfall of Fields International. He could see the company's headquarters, a building that once symbolized everything he hated and then everything he conquered. Now it was just a building, a monument to a war that had left no victors. The empire he had seized felt like a kingdom of ghosts, a hollow prize from a battle that had cost him everything that mattered, a truly life-changing perspective shift. He looked at his reflection in the glass, and for the first time in years, he didn't see the powerful secret billionaire or the master of revenge. He saw a lonely, broken man, an echo of the father he so despised. He had become a king with an empty castle and a fractured heart. The silence was his only subject, the regret his only counsel. The entire revenge plot, which had been the driving force of his life, now seemed like a pointless, tragic exercise in self-destruction. It was in that moment of stark, painful clarity that the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a thought, but a deep, cellular certainty. Destroying his family had been a fool's errand. The real prize, the only thing of any value he had ever possessed, was Julie. Her love, her kindness, her unwavering belief in him that was the true fortune. He had treated it like an afterthought, and in his blindness, he had lost it all. The memories of their love story flooded his mind, not as a source of comfort, but as a painful inventory of his loss. He remembered her laughter in their tiny first apartment, her hand in his as they faced being disowned, her unwavering support through years of struggle. She was his partner, his sanctuary, his moral compass. She was his true love, his destiny. And he had traded her for a ledger sheet that showed his enemies were financially ruined. What a pathetic, foolish trade. This was the ultimate, cruelest plot twist. He had set out to prove his father wrong, to show him that the love of a poor girl was worth more than a fortune. But in his methods, he had proven his father's cynical worldview correct. He had let vengeance corrupt him to the point where he valued destruction over creation, power over love. He hadn't just humiliated his family, he had humiliated the very principle he had once fought for. The full weight of his betrayal against Julie crashed down on him. It wasn't just the community center, it was the years he had spent nurturing a secret darkness inside him, a part of his life he had deliberately hidden from her. He had built a wall between them, brick by brick, with every vengeful deal he made. The destruction of the center wasn't an accident, it was the inevitable collapse of that wall, revealing the corrupted man who stood behind it. Staring out at the city, Calvin Fields finally understood. His war was over, but he had been fighting on the wrong front. The real battle was never against his family, it was for his own soul. And he had lost. Or rather, he had surrendered it willingly for a victory that now tasted like ash. This painful, soul-shattering epiphany was not an end, but a turning point. He had reached the bottom. The only way left to go was up, towards a path of true and meaningful redemption. The very next day, the empty shell of Calvin Fields, the vengeful billionaire, was gone. In his place was a man with a singular, desperate mission: redemption. He officially abandoned his revenge plot, leaving the husk of his family's company to be managed by his board. He liquidated his personal assets, a staggering fortune that could reshape cities, and funneled it all into a new, anonymous foundation. Its sole purpose was to undo the damage he had done and to build something beautiful from the ruins. His focus was the community center. He didn't just want to rebuild it, he wanted to create a masterpiece of hope. Working under a pseudonym, he hired the best architects, educators, and community organizers in the country. The plans were ambitious: a state-of-the-art facility with a library, a sports complex, an arts and music wing, and scholarship programs for every child who walked through its doors. It was a project born not of ego, but of profound, gut-wrenching regret. This was his penance. Every blueprint he reviewed, every check he signed, was an apology to Julie he couldn't yet speak. He poured all the energy he had once dedicated to destruction into this singular act of creation. He worked tirelessly, driven by a desperate need to prove to himself, more than anyone, that the man Julie fell in love with was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of anger and pride. It was a life-changing endeavor, a baptism by philanthropy. He kept his involvement a complete secret. The community was stunned when a mysterious benefactor stepped forward not only to save their center, but to transform it into a dream they never thought possible. They didn't know the name of the man behind the money, and that's how Calvin wanted it. This wasn't about public praise, it was a deeply personal act, a quiet conversation with his own conscience, and a desperate love letter to the woman he had lost. As the new building began to rise from the dust of the old one, something inside Calvin began to shift. The cold satisfaction of revenge was being replaced by a fragile, unfamiliar warmth. Seeing the joy and hope on the faces of the community members, watching the children's excitement, it was a feeling more profound than any boardroom victory. He was healing the community he had broken, and in doing so, he was beginning to heal himself. He knew this grand gesture might not be enough to win Julie back. He understood that trust, once shattered, couldn't be rebuilt with bricks and mortar. But this wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a bribe to earn her forgiveness. It was the only way he knew how to demonstrate that he had finally understood his catastrophic mistake. It was proof that he had hurt her, that her quiet dignity had been the shocking wake-up call that saved him from his own darkness. The project became his entire world. He sold the penthouse, the sports cars, the symbols of his hollow victory. He moved into a simple apartment, mirroring the life he and Julie had once shared. He was shedding the skin of the vengeful tycoon, hoping to find the man he was before the family drama corrupted him. He was trading his fortune not for power, but for a chance, however slim, to be worthy of the true love he had so carelessly thrown away. The final confrontation took place not in a boardroom, but in a small, sterile office where his father now served as a consultant, a king in exile. Calvin walked in, not as Mr. Black or a vengeful specter, but as himself. His father looked up, his eyes widening in a mix of shock and hatred. He was expecting a gloating victor, the final turn of the knife in his public humiliation. But the man who stood before him was not the one he expected. There was no anger in Calvin's demeanor, no fire of revenge in his eyes. There was only a calm, profound sadness. He looked at his father, a man shrunken by defeat, clinging to the last vestiges of his pride, and he felt nothing but pity. The rage that had fueled him for a decade had simply vanished, replaced by a deep, emotional understanding of the tragedy of this man's life. It was a completely unexpected plot twist in their long and bitter family drama. "I didn't come here to gloat," Calvin began, his voice even. "I came here to tell you that I'm done. The war is over." His father sneered, "So you've come to enjoy your victory? To see what you have done to your own family?" The venom in his voice was palpable, but it no longer affected Calvin. He had spent his life craving this man's approval, then his fear, and now he realized he needed neither. "My victory?" Calvin replied with a small, sad shake of his head. "My victory cost me everything that mattered. For years, I wanted to destroy you, to make you as poor and powerless as you made me feel. But I was wrong. You're the one who has always been poor." His father's face contorted in fury at the insult, but Calvin continued, his words carrying the weight of a hard-won truth. This was the final act, not of vengeance, but of a quiet redemption. "You have all this money, this legacy you were so desperate to protect," Calvin said, his gaze unwavering. "But your heart is bankrupt. Your life is empty. You trade in power and fear, but you know nothing of love or loyalty. You're surrounded by people who are either afraid of you or want something from you. You are the poorest man I have ever known." Every word was a quiet, devastating truth, not an attack. He then spoke of Julie. "The day you disowned me for loving a poor girl, you sealed your own fate. You thought you were teaching me a lesson about wealth, but you did. Just not the one you intended." A genuine, faint smile touched Calvin's lips. "Julie taught me what real wealth is. It's integrity. It's kindness. It's having someone who sees you for who you are and loves you anyway. That's a fortune you can't build, and it's a fortune you'll never have." With that, Calvin turned and walked away, leaving his father speechless and utterly defeated in a way no corporate takeover ever could. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't issued a single threat. He had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had shattered the old man's soul. Calvin walked out of that building feeling lighter than he had in years. He had finally escaped his father's shadow, not by destroying him, but by understanding him. It was a life-changing moment of true freedom. The grand reopening of the community center was a huge event, a celebration of hope and second chances for the entire neighborhood. The new building was magnificent, a shining testament to the generosity of the mysterious benefactor no one had yet been able to identify. Julie was there, her heart filled with a bittersweet mix of joy for the community and a lingering sadness for what she had lost. She was trying to move on, to focus on the good that had miraculously emerged from the rubble. As the ceremony began, the mayor took the stage to thank the anonymous donor. While this person wished to remain private, she announced, they ultimately agreed that their story was one of hope and redemption, and that it needed to be shared. A murmur went through the crowd. Please welcome the man who made all of this possible, Mr. Calvin Fields. A collective, shocking gasp swept through the audience. All eyes turned to see Calvin walking humbly onto the stage. Julie felt the air leave her lungs. Her mind reeled as she tried to connect the man who had allowed the center to be destroyed with the man who had just resurrected it so beautifully. It was a dizzying, unbelievable plot twist. Calvin approached the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found hers. The look in his eyes was not of a proud billionaire, but of a man laying his soul bare for the world to see, a profoundly emotional moment. He began to speak, his voice clear and steady, but laced with a vulnerability no one had ever heard from him. He didn't talk about business or money. He told his story. He spoke of his anger, his misguided quest for revenge, and the terrible price of his actions. I became so obsessed with tearing down an old, broken house, he said, his gaze locked on Julie, that I didn't realize I was setting fire to my own beautiful home in the process. Then, he addressed her directly, his voice cracking with emotion. I stand here today not as a benefactor, but as a man who is deeply sorry, especially to one person, Julie Larson. He paused, taking a shaky breath. I destroyed something you loved, and in doing so, I betrayed your trust and our love story. This building isn't a payment for what I did. It's an apology, written in concrete and steel. It's the start of me trying to become the man you always believed I could be. He looked away from the crowd, speaking only to her now. I spent years building an empire, thinking it would make me strong. But I was wrong. Real strength is admitting when you're wrong. Real wealth is the true love I threw away. Julie, I love you. And I know now that your love is worth more than any company, any fortune, any empire. It's the only thing that was ever real. It was a raw, public declaration, the ultimate surrender of his pride. Tears streamed down Julie's face as she listened. The crowd was silent, captivated by this incredible confession. She saw in his eyes the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had been lost for so long. She saw his regret, his sincerity, and the depth of a love that had survived even his own worst impulses. This wasn't a performance, it was a man who had been through the fire and had finally found his way back. A life-changing moment of public accountability. As Calvin finished his speech, the silence was broken by applause, not just polite clapping, but a genuine, heartfelt ovation from the community he had first wronged and then saved. But Calvin didn't hear them. His world had narrowed to a single point: Julie. He stepped down from the stage, his heart pounding, and walked towards her, stopping a few feet away, giving her the space to make a choice. He had laid his soul bare, the rest was up to destiny. Julie looked at him, and through her tears, she saw the truth. She saw the genuine redemption in his eyes. He hadn't just rebuilt a building, he had rebuilt himself. He had understood the profound depth of his mistake, and had done everything in his power to make it right, not for praise, but because it was the right thing to do. The cold, vengeful billionaire was gone, and in his place stood the man she had always loved, the man who had simply lost his way in a world of family drama. Without a word, she closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. It was a gesture of complete forgiveness, an acceptance of his apology and his heart. Calvin held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. In her arms, he was finally home. Their love story, which had endured the most impossible trials, had finally found its triumphant, emotional reunion. This was their true love, reforged and stronger than ever. Watching from the edge of the crowd, hidden in the shadow of a luxury car, were his father and mother. They had come to witness what they assumed would be his final public humiliation, but instead, they were confronted with his greatest triumph. They saw the cheering crowds, the beautiful building bearing a name other than theirs, and worst of all, they saw him with her. They saw him powerful, beloved, and whole in a way he never was with them. They stood there, completely and utterly defeated. They had been beaten not by a superior business strategy or a more ruthless tactic, but by a force they had never valued and could not comprehend: love. Calvin's act of creation was infinitely more powerful than their lifetime of acquisition. Julie's forgiveness was a currency their fortune could never buy. They were left humiliated on the sidelines, irrelevant spectators to a victory they couldn't even understand. Calvin and Julie stood together, oblivious to the family watching them, their world once again just the two of them. He had been disowned, cast out, and had returned for revenge, but had found something far greater. He had learned that true power wasn't in destroying your enemies, but in building a better world. And true wealth wasn't in a bank account, but in the arms of the person who made you want to be a better man. Calvin and Julie's story reminds us of a powerful truth: you can gain the entire world, but if you lose your soul in the process, you have absolutely nothing. True wealth isn't measured in figures, but in the courage to admit a mistake, the strength of forgiveness, and the power of a love that refuses to give up. Redemption isn't a destination, it's a journey. If you also believe that kindness is a superpower, and that everyone deserves a second chance, then you've found your place. Subscribe now to join our community, a space for those who know that life's true value lies in the connections we build. Now let's do 3 quick things to keep this flame alive, like this video to spread the message that it's never too late to do the right thing. Comment below with the one word that describes the feeling this story left you with. Share this video with one person who needs to be reminded of the power of hope. And the journey doesn't stop here. While you wait for our next story, know that our channel is a treasure chest, filled with emotional videos just like this one. Explore our older content and discover other unforgettable journeys that are waiting for you. To make sure you don't miss any of the incredible adventures we have yet to tell, hit that notification bell. You never know what emotional roller coaster we're bringing next, and believe me, you won't want to be left out. This was the final shocking plot twist of their story. The rich man, poor woman narrative had been turned on its head. He had to lose everything, including her, to understand what was truly valuable. Their embrace was a symbol of a new beginning, a testament to the idea that it's never too late for a life-changing act of redemption, and that love, genuine and resilient, is the most powerful force in the universe.